Imagine a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The sun is climbing in the sky, casting a warm, familiar glow across the land. Children are laughing in a schoolyard, their voices carrying on a gentle breeze. A bird of prey circles high above, its keen eyes searching the fields below for its next meal. In the cities, the hum of traffic is a constant rhythmic pulse, the lifeblood of human endeavor. Everything is as it should be, a planet teeming with activity, sound and light. We take for granted the very air we breathe, this invisible ocean in which we live and move. It is the silent partner to every moment of our existence, present in every sunrise and every whispered word. Then, in an instant, it is gone. Not with a bang, but with a profound and terrifying silence. The change is not something you see, but something you feel in the very core of your being. The air in your lungs suddenly feels thin, useless. The familiar pressure on your eardrums vanishes, a sensation so disorienting it feels as though the world itself has been hollowed out. The sky, once a brilliant blue, shifts in a way your mind cannot immediately comprehend. The laughter in the schoolyard cuts off abruptly. The city's hum ceases. For 5 minutes, the fundamental element that sustains nearly all complex life on our world has simply ceased to exist. This is not a distant, astronomical event, but a deeply personal one. Every living creature that relies on this gas feels it at the same moment. The fish in the sea, the insects in the air, the great herds on the plains, and every human being on the planet are united in a single shared experience of sudden deprivation. It is a change more fundamental than the turning of the earth or the shifting of the seasons. It is the removal of the key that unlocks the energy in our food, the very spark of our metabolic fire. The world holds its breath, not by choice but by cosmic decree. A planetary-wide suffocation has begun. The initial shock is a sensory one. The sudden drop in air pressure would be catastrophic for our inner ears, the delicate organs of balance and hearing. Widespread, instantaneous deafness would descend, accompanied by a dizzying vertigo. The world would not only fall silent in its sound, but also in our ability to perceive them. You would be unable to hear the person next to you scream, even if they could. The familiar world is suddenly alien, a place of silent confusion and physical distress. The 5-minute clock has started ticking, and the consequences of this great absence are only just beginning to unfold across the globe. To understand the chaos that would ensue, we must first appreciate what oxygen does. It is far more than just something we inhale. Oxygen is the great enabler of life as we know it. It makes up about 21% of our atmosphere, a crucial ingredient in the air that fills our lungs. Within our bodies and in the bodies of most creatures, oxygen is the final essential component in the process of respiration. It allows our cells to break down the sugars from our food and release the energy that powers every single action, from the beating of our hearts to the firing of neurons in our brains. Without it, we are like a car with a full tank of fuel but no way to ignite it. But its role extends far beyond our own biology. Oxygen is a highly reactive element, and this reactivity shapes our world. It is the agent of fire. Combustion, the process that powers our cars and warms our homes, is simply a rapid reaction with oxygen. Without it, no flame can be lit, no engine can roar to life. It is also the agent of rust, the slow, steady process of oxidation that breaks down metals. Most importantly for the structure of our world, oxygen is a key building block. It binds with silicon to form silicon dioxide, the primary component of sand, quartz, and glass. This means oxygen is literally holding up our concrete buildings, our windows, and the very ground beneath our feet. In the atmosphere, oxygen plays another critical role, one that protects us all. High above the surface, molecules of oxygen, O2, are struck by the sun's powerful ultraviolet radiation. This energy splits them apart and they often reform as ozone or O3. This layer of ozone in the stratosphere acts as a planetary shield, absorbing the most harmful UV rays before they can reach the surface. Without this protective blanket, the sun's unfiltered radiation would be devastatingly intense, scorching the surface of the Earth and causing severe damage to any living tissue exposed to it. Oxygen, therefore, not only fuels us but also guards us from the harshness of space. So, when we speak of oxygen disappearing, we are not just talking about holding our breath. We are talking about the simultaneous failure of our body's energy systems, the crumbling of our built environment, the extinguishing of all fire, and the removal of our planet's sunscreen. It is a cascading failure of biological, chemical, and physical systems, all happening at once. The very chemistry of our world is predicated on its presence. Its sudden absence is a trigger for a complete and immediate transformation of the planet, turning a familiar home into a hostile and alien landscape in a matter of seconds. The very first second is one of pure sensory shock. The immediate and most violent effect is on our ears. The atmosphere pressing down on us exerts a constant pressure, and our inner ears are balanced against it. With 21% of that atmosphere instantly gone, the pressure drops as if we were suddenly teleported to the top of a high mountain. The delicate structures of the cochlea and vestibular system, which are not designed for such an abrupt change, would rupture. Every human and most land animals would suffer immediate explosive barotrauma. The result would be excruciating pain, permanent deafness, and a complete loss of balance. Simultaneously, the sky would change color. The beautiful blue we see every day is the result of sunlight scattering off the particles in the atmosphere, primarily nitrogen and oxygen. With a fifth of those particles gone, there's far less to scatter the light. The sky would darken dramatically, shifting from a bright azure to a murky dark purple or even black. It would look like the deepest twilight, even at high noon. The sun would appear as a sharp white and angry disk in this darkened sky, no longer softened by a dense atmosphere. The world would be plunged into an eerie gloom, its primary light source suddenly harsh and unfiltered. In the second and third seconds, the physical world begins to come apart. Every structure made of untreated concrete would fail. Concrete is held together by binders that rely on oxygen compounds. Without oxygen, these structures would lose their rigidity almost instantly. Dams, bridges, iconic skyscrapers, and countless buildings would not just collapse, they would essentially explode into vast clouds of dust and rubble. The world's great cities would be reduced to ruins in a heartbeat. Anything made of metal that was not painted or treated would also instantly bond together, as the protective layer of oxidation that prevents cold welding would vanish. By the fifth second, the consequences for life become dire. While you can hold your breath for a minute or more, your cells cannot. Cellular respiration ceases immediately. Without oxygen to accept electrons at the end of the metabolic chain, the production of ATP, the energy currency of the cell, halts. The brain, being the most energy-intensive organ, would be the first to suffer catastrophic failure. Unconsciousness would be swift, occurring within seconds. There would be no gasping, no struggle for air, just a sudden, silent shutdown of the system. Every conscious creature on the land and in the air would simply fall. As the seconds tick by, the biological impact deepens. While humans and other land animals would fall unconscious almost immediately, the process of cell death would begin in earnest. Without the energy to maintain their basic functions, cells would start to break down. Membranes would lose their integrity, and the intricate machinery within each cell would cease its work. This is not a gentle slide into death, it is a rapid, systemic failure. For plants, the situation is slightly different. They produce oxygen through photosynthesis, but they also use it for their own respiration, especially at night, or in parts of the plant that don't photosynthesize. They too would begin to suffer from this cellular energy crisis. The world of machines would fare no better. Every internal combustion engine would instantly stop. Cars coasting down the highway would fall silent, their power steering and brakes failing. Airplanes, which rely on the combustion of fuel with oxygen, would become gliders. Their engines would flame out, and with no hope of restarting, they would begin their long, silent descent towards the ruined cities below. The skies, once paths of commerce and travel, would become paths of inevitable disaster. Any fire, from a campfire to an industrial furnace, would be snuffed out as if by a giant invisible hand. The world's power grids, heavily reliant on combustion, would collapse. The very ground we stand on would feel the effects. The Earth's crust is nearly 50% oxygen by weight, bound up in silicate minerals. While the solid rock deep underground would be unaffected in this short time, the surface would not be so lucky. The loss of atmospheric oxygen would create a powerful chemical imbalance. The exposed surfaces of rocks and soil would become unstable. The sudden lack of oxidation would cause a rapid, almost explosive decomposition of surface materials. The world would not just be crumbling from its buildings down, it would be unraveling from its very surface. The oceans, a vast reservoir of life, would face their own unique catastrophe. Water itself is 1/3 oxygen by atom, but it is the dissolved oxygen that aquatic life depends on. This dissolved gas would immediately begin to escape from the surface layer of the water, boiling off into the thin, oxygen-free atmosphere. While deeper waters might retain their oxygen for a little longer, the surface would become a death zone. Furthermore, water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen, now unbound in the upper atmosphere where water vapor existed, is the lightest element. It would begin to escape into space, a permanent loss for our planet. As the first minute passes, the planet would be unrecognizable. Darkness would cloak the globe, a deep twilight punctuated by the harsh, unwelcoming glare of the sun. The silence would be absolute, broken only by the sound of crumbling concrete and the whistle of wind moving through the skeletal remains of cities. This wind would be different, composed only of nitrogen and trace gases, feeling strangely thin and offering no sustenance. The air itself would feel sharp and cold, as the drop in pressure would cause a corresponding drop in temperature. A sudden chilling flash freeze would sweep across the surface of the planet. The physiological effects on any creature still technically alive would be horrific. Without oxygen, the sun's ultraviolet radiation would now be striking the surface with its full, unmitigated power. Any exposed skin would suffer an instantaneous and severe sunburn. It would be like standing next to an arc welder without any protection. Even if one were to somehow remain conscious, the pain would be immediate and overwhelming. This solar bombardment would sterilize the surface of the Earth, shredding the DNA of any microorganisms caught in the open and scorching the leaves of plants. During these 5 minutes, the planet enters a state of suspended animation, a pause between one chemical reality and the next. The great cycles of nature, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, would be violently interrupted. With no combustion, the vast amounts of carbon dioxide we normally produce would cease. With no photosynthesis or respiration, the exchange of gases between plants and the atmosphere would stop. The world would become a static, chemical wasteland. The changes are so profound and so fast that the normal rules of ecology and biology no longer apply. It is a world reset to a more primitive, hostile state. Imagine the view from space. The Earth, once a vibrant blue marble swirled with white clouds, would look different. The oceans might appear to shimmer as dissolved gases escape, and the continents would be shrouded in vast plumes of dust from the collapsing cities and decomposing surface. The familiar atmospheric haze would be gone, giving the planet a sharper, harsher appearance against the blackness of space. The thin, protective shell of our world would have been breached, and for these 5 minutes, Earth would be a wounded and dying planet, exposed and vulnerable to the cosmos. Then, after 5 minutes of silent, dark chaos, the oxygen returns. It would not be a gentle, life-giving restoration. It would be an explosion. The atmosphere, having been at a much lower pressure, would suddenly be slammed with a massive influx of oxygen, returning to its normal density. This would create a colossal pressure wave, a global thunderclap, that would sweep across the planet. The shockwave would be powerful enough to level any structures that might have miraculously survived the initial collapse. It would be a deafening, bone-shattering roar that would signal the end of the silence. The chemical consequences would be just as violent. The world is now filled with freshly exposed, highly reactive surfaces. Metals that were cold-welded would be torn apart by explosive oxidation. The thin, nitrogen-rich air would suddenly become a highly combustible mixture. Any spark, perhaps from grinding rocks or electrical shorts in the ruins, could trigger continent-spanning firestorms. Furthermore, the oceans, which had been releasing their dissolved gases, would now be exposed to a massive overpressure of oxygen. The gas would be forced back into the water with such violence that it would cause massive, unpredictable chemical reactions and superoxygenate the surface layers, proving toxic to any surviving marine life. For any human who might have survived the initial event in some pressurized, shielded environment, the return of oxygen would be its own form of hell. The sudden repressurization would be the reverse of the initial event, another round of excruciating barotrauma for anyone whose ears were not already destroyed. The air, now rich with oxygen again, would fuel immense fires, creating a toxic smog of epic proportions. The sudden exposure to high-energy solar radiation would have caused irreparable damage to our cells, ensuring that even if we survived the pressure changes, a lethal dose of radiation poisoning would already be sealed. The world after those 5 minutes would be fundamentally broken. The biosphere would be annihilated, the cities would be rubble, the atmosphere would be choked with dust and smoke, and the oceans would be a chemical soup. The return of oxygen does not mean the return of life as we knew it. It is simply the final violent act in a planetary catastrophe. It serves as a profound reminder. This invisible gas, this substance we ignore with every breath, is not just the air. It is the architect, the guardian, and the very foundation of our living world. Its brief absence reveals a truth we often forget. We live on a knife's edge, in a delicate and precious balance.